Live. Hello, hello. Hi. How do I thought I can invite Hannah. Hannah, why don't I see you? Oh, there we go. Hey, Daniela, yes, I will upload this, but I can't see you, Hannah.
Yeah, can you hear me though?
I can hear you.
Okay, hang on a sec. I'm gonna try again. Let's see. This was working earlier. Hang on a sec.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hi.
this is my first collaborative live, co-liberative live, as you like to say.
Hey.
So I'm excited. Oh, actually on Instagram. Yeah. So let me just introduce you for people who are going to be listening into this later and people who've joined right now. So Hannah and I have connected on Instagram. From what I know, she is a breathwork trainer, facilitator, educator, and she teaches through a decolonial lens and really grounds in some of the roots that are unfortunately distorted and diluted in most of mainstream teachings and sharings. And she has this absolutely exquisite, well thought out 2 year long training that she's taking people through. And there are all these little chapters and weavings through it. And um, it was in offering that she reached out to me and we connected because, as you all know, I teach and I'm trained in pranayam. But yeah, why don't you speak more to this in your background and what you're doing and just kind of set a little introduction.
Yeah. Well, hi, good morning.
Morning.
Um, yeah, so my name is Hannah Kendaru and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a Indonesian British breathwork practitioner and embodiment facilitator and trainer. And my work has evolved over the years to really attend to the wounds of our current modern culture. And what I've found is that the wounds that are coming up in our post-capitalist, late capitalist space is the wounds of colonialism, right? And so a lot of my work is liberation oriented, it's justice centered. And this training really empowers the individuals to go through their own process of decolonial healing, which is an emergent process. But we go through that journey, and then and then we're given tools to take people through those journeys. And yeah, like Niv said, it's a 2 year long course, and it's deep and it's challenging and it challenges, and it's a space really to really attend to the wounds and the wisdom of our collective histories.
Mm.
And I do this through the breath and through embodiment. And so
Mm.
working with Niv was what felt like a natural branching of the roots that this course needs. Um, and so I'm really, really grateful to be co-liberating with you.
Mm. Yeah, I would love to just actually go a little bit deeper on some of those things that you mentioned because they land for me really powerfully. But I imagine for a lot of people who are coaches, therapists themselves, even yoga teachers who are opening themselves to this world and this technique and this tool and this history and this culture of breath work, understand it very much from the perspective of you breathe in a certain way and the breath regulates the nervous system, right? That's the whole the regulation of the nervous system. And it helps with stress and anxiety and tension and day-to-day things. And then there's another block which is kind of like this breathwork experience, which is people go into some ceremony or they go into some event like a 2 hour event and are moved through this experience, which is it brings up things. It's like very intense, and in those 2 hours immersive, and they kind of come up with these like, oh, I went there, or this wound came up, and it's like, very sometimes ecstatic, sometimes they're crying, uh, and kind of then just go about their daily life. So those are the two ways in which people, I know that people mostly understand it. And I'm a little bit separated from that because I'm so in my own zone and my own work, and the students that I call in are so um, eager to dive really deep. But I'm currently based in Sydney, and specifically in a neighborhood as well where there are a lot of these kinds of trainings or teachers or experiences. So I was curious, I was like, okay, let me see what this is about. Now I said, oh wow, it's so, that's how and the why is so minimal compared to the what, if that makes sense. Like how you are arriving to the practice, how you approach and sit with the breath, how you tend and build intimacy with the breath, and why truly deeply are you doing so beyond just the needs of the physical body, are lost in comparison to the doing and the action and the performative and the what and the almost kind of superficial feel to it. And I'm not judging, it just is, right? It just is. It just is. And for some people, that's perfect. Maybe that's exactly what their capacity is and what they need. So, there's something out there for everyone, but you are kind of like in dialogue and almost pushing back against those other more popular forms of knowing breath work. And you kind of mentioned the lens and the strategies that you use, but I'd love to just go a little bit deeper into expanding on that for people who only know breath work as what I just mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that summary. Um, and just to expand on that, breathwork as a field is pretty young, right? As an industry, it's pretty young. But the practice isn't, right? And oftentimes, when a new skill or a new tool that has been found, quote unquote, or discovered, by the West, it tends to create a whole new industry, right? And we've seen this happen in various ways. And so we're kind of seeing it happen in breathwork right now. And so that's what we're kind of witnessing, is the use of this tool to attend to our own ways that we've attended mental health, which is through an individualistic perspective, right? And so breath work is now being used for self-actualization. It's used for kind of mindset and abundance. It's used for personal trauma. And I mean, like you said, we're not in a judgment space. This is what people need, and that's what they're coming to, right? And that's what's being offered. And those things can be powerful. And yet, one of the most exciting things about where we are in this critical point of the evolution of breathwork as an industry, quote unquote, it's like we can actively participate in the way that this tool is being used, right? It has historically been appropriated. And so, what does it mean to reclaim the breath back into a space of deep knowing and deep remembrance of how breath is medicine, right? And so, the breath in the way that it is in anything is a tool, right? And so it's more around how do we use it. And for many of us, it is it can be used just to regulate. And within the Western psychological framework, regulation is kind of synonymous to kind of calming down or attending or calming our active reactions, right? And so what would happen within our colonial frameworks, if we calm down or if we regulate, it actually also allows us to simmer our rage and not necessarily being into a space of activation of what justice means, right? So we've just been taught how to tolerate pain, right? And these tools have been taught to allow us to get back to our normal work and our dysfunctional families or relationships and teaching us how to stay calm in those toxic environments, right? Whereas what would it be like if we used the breath to stay with our rage and to alchemize that into action and move that from a space of just attending to the symptom and really activating our indigenous wisdom, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. And I think that's exactly it. It's just there are so many layers to it. And it's how deep are you willing to go and where are you willing to really pause and sit with something as opposed to it just being pushing you into continuing with other systems of harm or toxicity.
Yeah.
And so I'm I'm gonna get to that. I just want to answer this question which came up, and maybe you can help me answer it so that I'm also making sure I'm answering correctly because I don't actually know much about breathwork, I'll be quite honest. I know much more about pranayam. So for people listening, I can speak a little bit to pranayam and maybe you can speak in conversation with that about breathwork. So pranayam is the second limb of Ashtanga yoga. If you're looking at the lineage of yogic tradition that is rooted within the subcontinent of India and has thousands of years of history to it and has evolved definitely over time, has definitely had its own histories of colonization and morphing, etc. Like nothing is void of that. We don't live, there's no lineage that lives in vacuum. Let's be honest about that. But even so, a lot of its a lot of its authenticity has been retained by some teachers and some books and some texts. And so we understand prana, yam is prana is the vital life force, yama is expanding, or ayama is controlling. So it's the expansion, the control, the intimacy, the um, morphing of and utilizing of prana, which is vital life force. And this is beyond just the physical. This is now we're talking about the subtle. And in yoga, we acknowledge the energetic body, we acknowledge the subtle body, we acknowledge the spiritual body, we acknowledge the causal body. All of these bodies make up the individual, and we acknowledge very much so the collective body as well. So when thinking about pranayama, with oh, I started echoing.
You're good on my side.
Okay. I'll just deal with the echo. So pranayama is the control, expansion, and taking care of prana, the vital life force. Oh, this is actually very difficult for me to do. I'm going to maybe unmute and mute because I don't know why I'm hearing myself back. Or maybe you mute yourself when I'm speaking.
Yeah, I'm trying to do
Okay, now I'm not echoing. Sorry, guys. You know how disturbing it is. Like, okay, I got you the first time. Um, so it's not just in Ashtanga yoga, it's in many different lineages of yoga. And like I said, it's acknowledging not just the physical body, but the causal body, the energetic body, the spiritual body, and how working with the breath is really a way to tune into our inherent creative, vital, immune, energetic force that is a healing power, not only for ourselves, but also for the vibrancy and the collective status. And acknowledging that when we think about harms in the system and we think about harms outside of us, so much is first needed to be tended to internally. And it's a perspective as well, knowing that you are tending to things internally so that you can step into your society with deeper discernment, with deeper resilience, with deeper stamina, and do a type of work that might require more of that from you because you're moving against the tide, because you're doing something that isn't fully accepted and embraced in the status quo society. So there are many specific techniques that really help to cultivate that deeper energetic field in many different ways within pranayama. But I will say that the emphasis, at least in the way that I've learned, is really slow, gentle, over a long period of time. There's no rush. There's nothing that's going to, radically change in 3 months. It's not about the ego. It's not about your like performance of something. It's so subtle and it's so internal. And sometimes you just need a whole year practicing tuning into the breath and being aware of the breath before you actually even go deeper into noticing and sensing into prana, because that's prana is like the subtle energy of the breath, you could say that. So we understand the breath, we understand oxygen, we understand the ins and outs of our inhale and exhale. Are we understanding our innate vitality and how we lose it, how we share it, where we receive it from? No, people have absolutely no idea. So pranayama is a way of really first and foremost arriving to that through the breath. And of course, because it's so intricate and there's so many beautiful different techniques, there are health implications as well that tie specifically for me to Ayurveda and understanding the mind, body, spirit as one integrated whole. And so when you are getting to the roots of disease, you're looking deeper into the energetic imbalances, and that isn't a one size fit all breathing for everyone. We get to go even deeper, whereas someone's heat is off balance, someone's coolness is off balance, someone's wind circulation is off balance, someone's digestive fire is off balance. And so pranayama opens you into these subtleties and really teaches you about the subtleties. And again, the emphasis is so much on preparing you for something much deeper, much larger, much more expansive than just going about your daily life. If you're looking at it from the yogic perspective, it's really preparing you for deep-seated meditation, actually, and stillness, and giving your full devotion, I would say, to the spiritual realm. But you have to have walked through so much on the physical and the mental to go there. So again, if taught in isolation, it can fall into the same patterns that you see anything else fall into, which is why I like to teach it in conversation to ethics of yoga, to the yamas and niyamas, because it is in conversation with those things when you're looking at the yogic lineage as a whole. And nothing was ever taught in isolation. Now things are taught in isolation. Asana is taught in isolation, and things, aspects of pranayama taken and taught in isolation. But really, it's a big one whole thing, and I like to place it there so that these deeper implications that you have mentioned, that you bring so much light to and emphasis to, aren't lost. But that was a very long-winded speech on pranayama. I'm sorry, I got a bit lost with the echoing, and then anyways, I think we're getting a sense of what it is, and maybe you can speak now to breathwork and how it's, where it comes from, how it's different, all that stuff.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you for saying that and going into depth, because it is currently being kind of spoken about interchangeably, which I think is not fair to the lineage of pranayama, and I don't think it's necessarily accurate, right? And so there's a level of honesty that needs to be said in these conversations. So breathwork, in the sense of what is being understood now, is, as an emerging field, there are 3 functional styles of breathwork. The first one is breath hygiene. And interestingly, pranayama is kind of in the hygiene space, which is around daily practice. It's around attending to your own kind of mental, spiritual, and physical hygiene. And so I guess this is where our attendance to disease is, right? And like you said, it's compartmentalized. So let's be aware of these structures. But I'm just outlining these so that you can understand it a little bit better. The second functional style is probably functional breath work, which is kind of where we see the cold exposure breaths. It's where we see the Boteko method. It's lung capacity. It's free diving. That's kind of where we're looking at. It might be even elite athletic performance, right? Around how do we really optimize our breathing systems. And so that's the second functional style. And then the third functional style is the deeper explorations, right? And so these are using actually what is a very simple breathing method, something that is called the conscious connected breath, or you can have other more charged versions of it, but it's kind of essentially the same. And this taps into a deeper sense of being, and it can trigger a different state of consciousness. And so a lot of what we're understanding as breath work right now is in this deeper exploration space. The way that I would like to see breathwork framed is having understood that there's a lineage of knowledge in pranayama, which is within the yogic traditions. I would like to propose that actually every tradition has a breathwork practice, right? Has a breathwork lineage, in the sense that if we see pranayama as one of the let's say most prominent, but it's also the most recently appropriated, let's say. And so there are other lineages of breathwork in every culture that we are a part of. And so if you have any, if we think about other indigenous cultures, whether they are dancing together, they are breathing together. Whether they are chanting together, they are breathing together. If they're singing together, they're breathing together. If they're praying together, they're breathing together. And so I would say that breath work is a universal unifier that lives on earth. Everything breathes. And when we practice that, we can actually actively engage with the way that the planet breathes, and the waters and the skies and the plants and all the stones. And we breathe just as the planet does. And as displaced beings, the breath is then a portal to lead us towards the connection to the land that we have been lost from, right? And so I would say a key distinction from pranayama and breath work in the way that I do it is that breath work is the portal towards your own lineage, right? And so what does that mean when we're practicing this embodiment? What can it lend us when we are practicing in that way, right? And one of the beautiful lessons that we get from pranayama, which is an ancient practice, is that we can see how the breath can help us fortify, right, our practice into the spiritual, into our ancestral, into our emotional, into our health. And so we know the power of the breath. We are just on a path of figuring out what our connection to the breath is based on your own lineages. And every single person has connection to that breath and has connection to the land. We are just in a space of collective amnesia, not choicefully, but forcibly, right? And so breathing in this way, when we remember that breathing is not only automatic, but it's also under our control, it's an invitation into our own evolution. It's an invitation into our own healing. It's an invitation into our own remembering and transformation, right? And so I would say there's quite a big distinction around breathwork and pranayama, because I would propose that breathwork is an invitation to explore our own lineages, and pranayama is a lineage of breath, which has a huge amount of wisdom. And one of the things that does need to be said at this point is that a lot of what is coming through, let's say, Western reiterations of pranayama, which they are now coining into other names, right? Is the appropriation of a practice. They are not new or newly discovered practices. They're not things that people have just stumbled upon. They are old and ancient practices that are just being repackaged. And so it's just an important process for us to revolt against the ways society has tried to repackage our indigenous cultures, and actively be part of ways of resistance to that. And so I propose that breathwork is one of those ways.
Well, I've never heard anyone else say it the way you say it. And so, like, how do people get to work with you? Like, because it's trending. It's a thing. People are curious, like I said, and it's so important that we guide them towards teachers and containers and trainings that are truly heart centered, truly activating that remembrance. And it's like, even with pranayam, I would say it just so happens to be that I have a background in so many of these things that you speak of. So when I'm teaching it and positioning it, my students very much know what I stand for and what I'm inviting them to stand for as well, which is truth with a capital T. and their own truth, and being in fierce integrity, being in fierce accountability, being in fierce just like care in all ways. And that's not easy. I tell them it's not easy. Don't think that you're going to be praised and lauded for really living in your truth. It's an act of courage. And who's going to support you in this act of courage when everyone else, everything else seems to be crumbling around you? Your breath, your vitality, your ancestors. And how do you connect through this inhale, through this exhale, through this attention, through this intimacy? And it needs to be so tender and so nurturing. And here is the lineage, and here is what it's in conversation with, and here are these beautifully precise techniques that with reverence you can start to integrate, right? So that in itself is that's beautiful, but this is like you've stepped into this, even I feel like even more expansive, open-ended field, the field of breath work, which, like you said, doesn't necessarily have a very specific lineage, and are taking people into these depths, which is mind-blowing. Like when you hear about something like that, I would think, why would you want to learn it any other way? You know? So yeah, well, as a question then, what do you think that, from your perspective, is important for people to really be thinking about when they seek trainings or certifications or apprenticeships into breathwork?
So there's something to be said here around the tool, right? There are, when we engage in the breath in the way that you do on a breathwork training, you are actively engaging with your own personal and unconscious and dismembered parts of you. And so the practice in itself can be deeply moving, even without the intention of attending to those wounds, right? But what I would say, so the breath is powerful. That's kind of what we're already saying, right? So it's kind of like, how do we, what are the considerations? Right now, breath work is not a protected term, and it's also not a space where people know so much about it, and so there's lots of different trainings happening, right? Some with kind of deeper knowledge, some with not so deep knowledge, some that are much shorter, some of them much longer. And so I think the important thing is here around the consideration of what about this tool and this practice excites you. As someone who is entering a space of modern contextual medicine work, right? If you're thinking about becoming a medicine person, in the modern context, what wounds are you willing to attend to? What is your purpose with it? Because when we are practicing, we can participate in the systems of oppression, or we can choose to resist them, right? And unfortunately, in a way that I actually try to resist binary thinking, it's for this one, it's kind of specific for me, right? It's either this or that, and it's not that we do it well or that some people do. We all do what we can, but it's all trying to attend to what does liberation mean, right? So when you're considering training, I think it's important to consider the evolution of what our collective consciousness is going through. Right now, we're really witnessing the crumbling of systems, right? And And what we're seeing here is the tragic loss of many lives, and not just through war, but through um, our own lack of capacity to witness that, right? So there's so much pain and there's so much suffering. And if we are really trying to attend to the wounds of our modern culture and how our communities will evolve, people will be seeking ways to connect to the land and seeking ways to connect to their own lineage and to connect to their own histories, right? And so I would ask folks to attend to a loving justice practice on this, and consider the ethics of it. One of the things that is coming up right now is that there's so many breathwork trainings, and because there is this kind of fascination with the power of it, it is being kind of churned out and entered into kind of the white wellness space that we have seen, right? And so there's lots of people getting trained, and yet not necessarily fully equipped or fully prepared. And so it's really important that the courses that you look at have a really deep trauma training, and not just personal trauma, right? Because as we've seen when we do this kind of work, lots of things come up. It's not just what's here in this body, but it's intergenerational, it's historical, it's institutional. And also, I think a really important question here is who are your people that you want to attend to, right? Because if it is kind of the white wellness space and you want to go into retreats and do all that, then okay, then potentially you might not need a loving justice practice. But if there's a part of you that's like, okay, these are the communities that I'm working with, these are the ways they've been marginalized and oppressed historically, these are the pains that are coming up, how can I really attend to that and be a medicine person in the modern context? It's important to really remember that you have very specific gifts to attend to that community, and it's a process of preparation. And I love that you brought that word in, Niv, because that's all this is, right? It's preparing you to be in service of these collective colonial wounds. And there's also an important part around the consideration of the teacher and the communities that you'll be a part of. One of the things that I am sitting here with a little bit of joy in is that whenever people join my course and we learn together and connect together, like with you, Niv, as well, we're adding companions onto this path, right? And this journey is a really long and hard journey. And so, yeah, it's about finding your people and finding folks that can walk this path with you, because it is hard and it can be really isolating, especially when we're resisting systems. So yeah, there's also find your people. Who do you want to be surrounded by? What conversations do you want to have? What ethics do you want to cultivate?
100%. Yeah, I think for me to that piece about ethics, what ethics do you want to cultivate? Is just be clear with that. Be clear with that, just be clear with that so take some time out, take some time to reflect on it, have a think on it before jumping into that kind of like urgency that you need to do, the next thing. And okay, like it's this, you're just whatever's easy, whatever's your way, whatever you can easily afford, even at that time maybe. And instead say, there's no urgency, there's no rush here. The most important thing is to really arrive to it with deep resonance, deep heart-centered resonance. And that's on all levels, with the teacher that you are receiving from, and looking at them and saying, wow, when they speak and the way they walk and the values they speak and they talk about, I feel it really on a bodily level. I feel it energetically, and I feel the honesty there, and I feel the deep inspiration of how they are cultivating their life and walking. And then there's a layer of what are the ethics that they're speaking about? What are they in dialogue with? Is it in complete isolation? Are they acting like this is a vacuumed thing that you just do in, the confines of your bedroom and you go to work? And again, like maybe that's exactly what you need. Maybe that's what you have capacity for. But I mean, for most of the people who follow me, because it's something I speak so much about, I imagine you all are people that have compassion as this like big ethics, and compassion not just for the self and not just for the body, but for the subtle self, for the toxicity that you have to deal with, for the toxicity that you want to work, like you want to push past, and the toxicity you see on a collective level, infusing all of this with compassion, and seeing and finding a teacher who centers that in their work as well, who speaks on it, who's vocal about it at the very least, and other ethics that I can go on about, but like people hear me talk about it enough. Yeah, I see those two things, and with pranayam, like when I began to learn it formally, I would say, for me, it was very clear that I just want a teacher who is so humble and grounded and unknown and just deep in their practice, and and following a specific lineage with deep reverence and respect. That's what I wanted with pranayam. And like you said, pranayam has a lineage. So even still, it was not so easy to find that, but once I did, I trusted it fully and was exactly what I was seeking. But like you said, breathwork doesn't necessarily have a lineage, and your approach is to help people tap into their own indigeneity, their own lineage, their own ancestral wisdom. And that's so very specific. I think that should open up something for so many people listening who never even considered that as an aspect of breathwork, as a possibility of breathwork. And it's both, right? So, like, again, this is sometimes lost in the spiritual community, which is you do these spiritual practices, let's say, to transcend the material. So, there's a way of understanding pranayam or yoga or meditation as a way that almost diminishes and says, oh, this capitalism thing, this colonial thing, it's all just transient, blah, blah, blah. And it's not even real. So let's just ignore that, avoid that, be so in our practices, and then we just kind of transcend it. But like the fact is, you're living a daily life, you're living a worldly life, you're making choices, you're going to the market, you're buying things, you're having a family, you're engaged very much so within these systems. So where in your practice is the invitation to engage with these systems in a way that is truly uplifting, truly for the collective, truly rooted in integrity and truth telling, and all of the things that you and I are so aligned on. So that's something that needs to be that that's the duality that needs to be honored and is oftentimes not honored. And I appreciate you really naming it and bringing it into the space as almost a thing that can be prioritized in the it's like another, it's you're like almost flipping it in a way.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing, because yeah, it's not as a consequence, but it's actually by our driving motivator, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking around this idea of resisting urgency, and actually taking the time, right? And this is something there's a beautiful lesson when we get into the breath. Whenever we are actually in a state of urgency, kind of collectively, right? But when we are in a state of urgency, this is when we must slow down, right? Because if we attend to urgency with urgency, we are just kind of packing up onto the crisis, right? And so slow down. There's a kind of a process that I like to sit with, which is to sit with urgency so long that it then enters a process of emergency, to then sit with emergency and come up with a process that is emergent, right? And oftentimes we'll move in that discomfort of urgency before we can let ourselves get into the space of what is emergent here. And so there's an invitation to sit with that, right? And to go through that process of urgency to emergency and emergent. And it's so hard to do sometimes, right? Because as soon as you're like, oh gosh, I need to do something, and then you're like, and you're just finding the things that are most accessible and and before you know it, you're enrolled in a 6-week something, and it's like, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing. And so, yeah, there's a process of really slowing down. And yeah, this really putting it as a motivating factor of, okay, how do I decenter whiteness and decenter colonialism and capitalism? How do I unpack that and dismantle that? Whilst simultaneously, how do I continue my practice of re-indigenization, right? How do I reconnect with the lands and the waters that are within my lineage, right? I think it's important to acknowledge that everyone has a lineage. Everyone has a connection to this earth that is uniquely theirs, right? Whether you've been displaced or forcibly moved, whether you've moved for a better life, right? That is, still migration, and it's still forced displacement. And so there is this element of disconnection that we need to attend to. And so everyone has a lineage. And the wonderful thing about this is that there are so many people that would benefit so much from your process of re-indigenizing, right? Because you're creating that path for people. And so it's a liberation process, and it's a liberating process. And so what does it mean to be part of the emergent healing of our collective consciousness?
Yeah, I think the invitation that you've opened up for people is just it's so beautiful. It's so deeply moving. Again, just really understanding how deeply disconnected we feel, and also there are so many communities and groups of people that feel like they need to latch on to another culture's way of doing things or being, because they feel like there's nothing there in their own. There's so much that's lost. There's so much that is forgotten. And it's not to say it's a wrong thing to open yourself up to different cultures and ways of doing things and infuse it into your own. But it's like such a joy, such a celebration to actually step into this place where you're like, oh, wait, I too have this deeply intricate, intelligent, ancient wisdom flowing through me that is inherent to me, that is informed by the foods and the lands and the air and the climate that my ancestors lived through and were in reciprocity with, and all of that stuff. That whole history lives and breathes and is alive in me, and I actually get to tap into that, and that's so unique, that's so brilliant, that's such a gift. That's also awakening me to my unique purpose here. That's awakening me to my unique place here. And it gets to be something that's so personal. And so, yeah, it's just, it's just mind blowing how you get to work with the breath to go those places. you know? And so again, just shifting even deeper away from, yes, of course, absolutely exquisite as a tool for regulating the nervous system and bringing calm to the body and helping you go about your daily life. And also, let's look at the unending, you know, possibilities that it invites you into. And that is something that you receive from the teacher as well. Like it's the teacher who places that context. It's a teacher that invites you into that worlding. It's a teacher that has done that study in their own life, has moved through these things in their own life, and has walked so much of that path, and then invites you into that. And so, like with all of these practices, I feel like it's as much about, like with Ayurveda too, it's as much about, yes, the texts and the, you know, what is written and the techniques, as it is about who it is who is guiding you through this, and their wisdom, their discernment, their study, their intuition, their humility. And then another layer is your, as a student, your resonance with the teacher and your alignment with the teacher. So, yeah, just like hearing you speak, I'm in such appreciation of the fact that this exists in the world. That like some, you know, because yeah, like I said, I don't know anyone else who, not that I'm following very many breathwork facilitators or I'm tuned into that world, but your invitation, your weaving together is such a joy. It's so beautiful, and something that I wanted to make sure people understand a little bit better. And then maybe we can close, because I feel like we could keep having this conversation for a very long time.
Yeah, we can.
Is just this word emergent, because I know that you really understand it well. I understand it mainly from reading Adrienne Marie Brown's text, Emergent Strategy, which was really, um, for anyone who wants the record, please read it, because it really looks into how we grow and expand and build together, like with the land and humans, non-humans, so much more powerfully when it's collaborative over the narrative that we've been fed, which is competitive and survival of the fittest, and that kind of intensity, intense mindsets. But maybe you can just help that word emergent land a little bit deeper for us.
Yeah. So we've been kind of conditioned to be really attracted to well-trodden paths, right? And to ways of doing. And because we're in this space of collective amnesia where we don't really know, it is very attractive when someone comes and says, hey, this is how you do it, right? These are the steps. This is all this is, right? And because we have also been conditioned into a process of deep trust with authority, we don't activate those processes of knowledge within us. And so those processes of knowledge within us are inherent within us, but we just haven't practiced them, right? Another thing that has been deeply conditioned out of us is our practice of imagination. And we can kind of remember it in the same way as, like, okay, imagination is daydreaming or it's childish, or but actually imagination is a really key part for any iteration of evolution for the future. And so emergent lands on these facets, right? So the first is cultivating a trust within your own body and within your own self. And we know that so many of us have entered so many processes of self-betrayal that cultivating trust is really hard. And so this is a really challenging part, but it is part of that process. So it's a cultivating trust. It's a practice of non-knowing, right, or unknowing, or being in a space of uncertainty. And then finally, it's also being a part of imagination and letting things to what the verb here is to emerge, right? And so I think one of the ways that we've lost this skill is partly because we've separated, and like you said, Niv, we've isolated so many parts of us. And so bringing in that collaborative element, we're also entering a process of collaborative knowledge, right? What other lived experiences do you have? What other lived experiences are giving you wisdom? What where else can you learn outside of books or outside of literature or outside of rationality, right? And so emergent in this sense is that it's an element of new terrain, but it's new terrain that is deeply rooted and has always been there. And so it's coming like as a, like if you look onto a plain where you've just planted seeds, but you don't know that seeds are there. It looks barren and empty, right? It just looks like a void. But actually there are so many fertile seeds underneath, and it's just a matter of cultivating that and watering it. And those are the skills that that can be cultivated. And so this is how I understand emergent, in that sense of just being open to the process of self-trust, to discerning other forms of wisdom that are not through books or authority, and opening up to imagination and collaborative efforts of what can be in this moment, right? And so, yeah, that's how I
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so stunning. So again, like really it seeps into so much more. It's so for the person that is truly here to make change in a way that is really understanding the systems of harm that we are engaged in, understanding the deep disconnect that is creating immense suffering individually, collectively, globally, that is tuned into those deeper understandings and layers of health, I would say, like vitality, and is fully here and knowing that they're here to do it differently, do things differently, to imagine differently, to guide people in a way that isn't perpetuating those same systems of harm, working in a way that is rooted in ethics, creating an abundance that isn't feeding violence, right? Like really curating a life of purpose, of service, of um, of deep impact in a way that's actually at the roots, tending to the roots. And in doing so, this way in which you position breathwork and teach it isn't just supporting them to care for their own energy field as they do so, as they embark on that or they continue to grow on that, but also provides them with a framework and an understanding that like intellectually even supports them and just right like I'm just trying to see it like on all the different ways, all the different levels on which your way of walking and breathing and training is supporting them, like through their own breath, but through their own exploration of who they are, through their own opening into their own gifts, through their own cultivation of courage and trust,
Yeah.
through just, it's just, yeah, all the different all the different layers of it, which is is rare, I would say.
Yeah, I think one of the I mean, yeah, the important part around this, I think, is to remember the power of collectivity, and that the power that comes with deep liberation, right? When I say that this is emergent, it's because we haven't attended to these wounds collectively before, in a sense of like, little pockets have done it, and like, and communities have done it, and they've done it in their own ways, and it's been beautiful, but it hasn't necessarily been something that has actively been put into a space where we collectively come together in this, especially within breathwork, right? And so it is emergent, and that's what's emerging. But the thing is, like, I can't really dictate that or how that moves, right? And so there is like this honoring of that, there is like a little selfishness to it, right, in me kind of saying, hey, can we do this together? Right, because I have this dream and this vision, and I know that there are so many other potent compassionate agitators that are ready to attend to our colonial wounds, and it's like, okay, maybe we can do this together, and continue the work of unlearning both our internalized oppressions through that process, to then also attend to our general external oppressions that we are suffering under. And so, yeah, these programs that are needed will also go through processes of iteration and evolution, right? Because our societies will change, and our communities' needs will change. And so that's also being willing to do that. If I learn one way, so let's say right now there are kind of quite a few outdated psychological frameworks right now, right? And people have spent thousands of pounds into getting trained into something that has now been relatively outdated. And so how do we prepare ourselves for the evolution of our collective consciousness, right? And our need for decolonial healing, which is coming, and people are seeking it. And so it's about entering that process of liberation that is ready for change, in essence.
And that's the beautiful thing about ancient wisdom, whether it's through an actual lineage or whether it's through tapping into your own lineage. It's timeless. It's timeless. It's gonna be nourishing and nurturing and feeding whatever needs to be fed for the rest of time, because it's so intelligent and it's principled and it's a way of arriving to things, and context can change, people can change, and that wisdom is eternal. So yeah, it's beautiful that you're preparing people for that as well. So maybe just let people know where they can find you. And like, I know you've already started your current course, right?
Yeah, so I've just started our April cohort. Our next cohort is in November. And you can find me at inspire-breathwork.org, or come onto my Instagram at Inspire Breathwork. And yeah, if you're interested, then definitely just send me a message. We're all just a message away. So yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Is there anything else you wanted to add or leave on, or you feel like you really got to touch on the things that are important for you?
Yeah, I I think we covered most. I think I do want to just state my deep gratitude and appreciation for you, Niv, in this, because it is also, like you said, it's rare to find other compassionate agitators that are willing to challenge the systems of oppression that we are under, and do it with heart, right? And so, yeah, I'm just really appreciative of you and your work and the medicine that you bring into this world, and how lucky it is that you have, how lucky that your students and your folks are, to have you in your community. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. I'm going to be uploading this as well on YouTube and Spotify. So for anyone who wants to watch, re-listen to the full there. But thank you so much for joining, Hannah.
Mm, thank you for having me.
Okay. Take so much care. We'll connect soon.
Yes, take care.
Bye.
Bye.